Hello. Hello. Hi. Hello, everyone. Vercel, thank you so much for having us here today, and thank you guys all for coming and spending your Thursday here. This panel is all about AI for the enterprise, and I don't think we could have three better guests to speak on the subject, so I'm so excited to dive into it. Starting with the details, do you guys have any surprising or unexpected ways that your customers have leveraged your technology to date?
So I think I'll start with the OpenAI side of it. Everyone, I see it so often that it's hard to tell what is surprising and isn't surprising anymore. I think everyone is doing things in different industries. The healthcare ones are probably the most interesting because I didn't expect them to dive well into it because of the privacy concerns. But healthcare is diving in with both feet. And I think even some of the new multimodality stuff is starting to become very interesting. When we released Voice Engine, the one that was like the nearest and dearest to my heart was there was a patient that had suffered a neurological disease and she had lost her ability to speak. And what the doctors did was they had her say something and then they found a clip from her when she was in elementary school and gave her voice back. And even the idea of thinking through something like that was like phenomenal to me. So just like I think the ingenuity doesn't stop, and the startups are really pushing the boundaries.
Yeah, I love this question, and agree. It feels like AI is getting applied to everything now, so it's hard to pluck out what's new and exciting versus what's just going to be state of steady in the world in the next month. My favorite use cases, and I might be a little bit biased, are in the AI for software development domain.
Mm-hmm.
So places where I've seen really interesting multimodal applications of Gemini are around things like being able to feed the model a video and have it automatically create friction logs for you. Being able to do really interesting things like v0.dev, so you have a screenshot and you're able to generate code or generate something that can create a mock-up of the UI itself, going from Figma designs to actual live code. But the multimodal scenarios are the ones that I am most excited about in the next few months.
Yeah, I think nothing as humanly touching as what McDad said, but I think like there's a couple of use cases where we've seen people spin up like hundreds or thousands of agents in parallel. And so there's this cool service called like globe.engineer, and it does research. And so if you're coming out to New York and say New York pizza, and when you guys travel, if you do a trip, you open like tens or tabs to try to figure out everything you want to do. It'll just do it all in like
Nice.
5 or 10 seconds, and I think that's kind of really powerful when you see that.
Very cool. So this is obviously all about selling to customers, working with enterprises. We have a lot of like enterprise decision makers in the audience here today. A company that hasn't adopted AI, they want to, they know they should. How do you recommend that they even approach this process? Building a team around it, figuring out who to partner with, when to do it. It's a broad question, but what are your sort of personal approaches and advice when you're working with customers?
I got to start last time. You want to start this one?
Sure, yeah. What we try to tell people is start with your data. I think that's like the most important thing because you can start to do that work before you have to make any choices on models or anything like that. And then I think it's important to really have a strong evaluation framework because there are lots of different models, even from within a single company or different companies. So I think like we always tell people, start with your data. Really, this is the chance for you to fix your data models or even your data management. Do that work first because then it'll really pay off. And then have a strong eval framework so that you can move between the different models and see their functionality. That's where we tell people to start. And then it becomes easier to plug in the stuff higher up the stack.
Yeah, I agree. Having a strong evals philosophy is really, really important, especially given that AI is really powerful. I've been in this space for quite a while. But it's really not anything without actually having applied and grounded use cases. So you are being tasked with applying generative AI to improve your core business. You are the expert in your core business. So being able to define crisply the kinds of things that you're hoping AI will accelerate, the new capabilities that you want it to drive for your products, and building evals around them to be able to understand which models are already pretty great out of the box, which ones need to be augmented with some sort of fine-tuning data, and then also whether or not it's actually sort of getting the gains that you would have expected is really, really important. There are a lot of times when AI isn't required, and being choiceful about those times is really critical too.
One more thing on the evals is it also helps as the models become more powerful.
Yes.
Because it can help you eliminate things that you have in your workflow that you don't need there anymore.
Yeah, and to see how models improve
Yep.
over time.
Yeah, I think I'll take a different path. I think one of the first things that like every organization needs to do is awareness. So what we've seen a lot of organizations do is deploy something like ChatGPT Enterprise in-house, and they let everyone do whatever they need to do. And a lot of the interesting use cases come from users that you wouldn't expect. Like marketing turns out to be one of the biggest users internally, and they create their own use cases. We've seen companies like Moderna roll out like 750 GPTs internally without any API use cases. So like so many internal things. And then when you're ready to go, like I think the big thing is like your subject matter experts, just like everybody said, are coming from inside your organization, and they'll know best how to apply and scale. And then when you do scale, like obviously evaluation is a big deal. And one of the things to keep in mind is that like when a new model does come out, it's not necessarily that it does 10% better than the previous one. It's that it might do a different 60% than the previous 50% did. So it's important to keep in mind how things change with each model.
Yeah, I love that you mentioned that the marketing team comes up with really interesting generative AI applications. I also, one of the marketing reps within Google had always wanted to do game development. That was kind of a hobby project that they had been trying out on the side. And they were actually able to create a replica of Flappy Bird within the space of just an afternoon. It's really, really powerful to think about how AI is now getting democratized in a way that was never possible before. And means that we're going to see a lot more creativity in terms of these applications than we'd ever seen.
Sounds like the next $7 trillion investment if we're looking for it.
So I think Scarlett Johansson has been mentioned many times in the last hour, and it kind of brings up this idea of risk versus reward when shipping products. How do you guys personally think about how to evaluate the risk versus reward in shipping a product, whether it's at the companies you guys work at or the customers you work with? Because as an organization scales, there's just more and more people that are going to tell you no. There's compliance teams, there's legal teams, and there's entire teams that built around this. So would love to hear your personal philosophies.
Yeah. I can start first this time. Y'all took the lead the last times. The one thing that immediately comes to mind when I hear this question is the sort of the recent AI overviews that were added to Google.com and Google Search. I'm not sure if folks watching online or in the audience have had a chance to play with them just yet, but it's actually able to, in addition to the great search results that show on Google.com after you complete a search, kind of an overview based on all of that content. And that's really, really powerful. We're seeing incredible user satisfaction, lots of people getting to the right answers faster, asking more interesting questions. But that took a lot of kind of courage and work from people all over Google, all over Alphabet in order to actually make it happen. There was a lot of focus within the early days of Google to keep the Google.com search box very simplistic. And so when you have something that's so critical to your core business, making these kind of big changes, even though they might be the right changes and the best changes for users, are really interesting questions that leadership has to consider. And so from that perspective, there was a lot of effort put into user experience, live user testing, making sure that the quality bar is really, really high, and that also translates back to evals, making sure the performance is there, the latency is right. And again, y'all are all the experts in your users. So if you want to be able to make those large-scale changes, you need to make sure that the user experience would land with the audiences you care about.
Yeah, I think kind of building on that, it's also real data versus synthetic data, and then combining that with your cloud philosophies, right? You can start really quickly totally in the cloud with synthetic data, and you can be, I think that's quite safe. And then you can move towards like hybrid or on-prem environments as well for people that have like real data concerns that they don't want those things to go in the cloud. So you can kind of layer that in as well in terms of your strategy to really think about it.
Yeah, I think so I'm a product guy, so I'm gonna always start with the customer. There's this thing called Sheridan's levels of autonomy. It goes from like the human does everything to the AI does everything and all the steps in between. One of the things in the middle is something along the lines of like the AI informs the human of what it's done. Before that is like the AI provides options for what the human could do. I try to think about that all the time in terms of what's being deployed. And I think about risk reward, it really depends on what your user is willing to tolerate from an error state perspective. So if I take the Vercel example of like code gen, it's actually being presented to developers, and developers are the human in the loop. So can it afford to be wrong? Yeah, probably. Can it afford to be very wrong? Probably there as well. I think that like the idea is if it's meant to solve cold start, then it can solve cold start while accepting risk of it being wrong. You put systems around it to make sure that like it's not going to generate anything unsecure, it's not going to be able to execute without user intervention, and then the user gets to decide what they want to do. If you get into the full autonomous situations where like you're handing over control, then obviously you want to be a little bit more careful in terms of what you do and how you think about things. When we roll out products, obviously safety is number one concern, but it's when it comes to developer features, we try to roll them out sooner rather than later because we know that all of you want to have access to them as fast as possible so that you can iterate and you can figure out what's necessary. But if you start with who your user is and what they're going to do, it'll simplify your risk profile.
Yeah, I love what you said about transparency. So if the model is generating content, it's suggesting changes, it's not just automatically applying those changes without visibility to you as an engineer or to your customer. But being able to actually share like, hey, this is my thought process, here's why I think this, these are the changes I would recommend, do you approve?
Absolutely. I think it makes life for the user simpler, especially as they get more familiar with AI. I think in November, nobody knew and everyone was scared. I think the idea is that as all of you build more applications that expose AI to users, the tolerance bar starts to change, and I think we adapt accordingly.
Yep.
And now looking at this idea from the other side, for any founders, potential founders, engineers in the audience, when they are trying to secure their first pilot customer or get a company on board as a partner, what is most important? Like, what would you recommend that they go in solving for, empathizing with, or like understanding about their customer? Obviously, it varies on the use case, but advice for these people.
I'm going to give the generic advice and then we can like iterate a little bit. So I think the first step is solve a problem that your users are extremely passionate about and do things that are going to solve for pain, not for comfort. I think pain is a much faster selling feature than it is for comfort. A lot of the things that we're seeing are cold start pain problems of like staring at a blank page, not sure what to do, how to work through it. That seems to work quite well as a pattern. But I think that the people that struggle are the ones that are trying to find something that's going to raise the bar, but it's outside the psyche of the user normally.
Yeah, I agree. I think, again, with an AI for software development use case, but we've deployed generative AI pretty significantly around Google internally. So everything from kind of these inner loop processes of generating code, explaining code, all of the usual suspects chatting about code, to the things that hit the outer loop. So how do you improve code performance? How do you make migrations easier? How do you sort of improve the code review process and actually generate the changes for the person who would be replying to the code reviews? All of those things. And it really resonates a lot more with the partner teams we work with to integrate those Gemini features. When you start targeting the things that they really, really hate spending their time doing. Like, as an engineer, I really, really love building things. Like, I love thinking about hard problems. I love writing code. And so the notion that models would start doing that makes me really sad because it's like, that's what I enjoy spending my time doing at work. Really working with people and creating things. But if you tell me like, hey, it makes it easier for your software to be maintained, It makes sure that everything's a lot more secure, that your software is more performant, so you use less compute, or you're able to kind of solve your business problems faster and can focus on what you really enjoy doing. That's a huge value add, and so it motivates the partner teams to kind of move faster, to really consider the experiments as opposed to thinking about the parts of their day that AI might take away, but they're the parts that they enjoy doing most.
Yeah, what I try to tell entrepreneurs that I come across these days is, enterprises are faster than ever. So like the linear use cases, you should just assume that they can accomplish them, right? Because they can use the same co-pilots and everything else now. So that edge that existed previously between startups and enterprise has really collapsed. So in this way, you really have to kind of think about the problem where I think you have a lot more leeway when you're a startup. And that's like with AI at scale. So a lot of people are taking on problems like, I can replace a human by doing this thing with a single agent. I think the enterprise are going to pull that off themselves. But where it really becomes differentiated, you're like, well, what if it wasn't one agent working on this, it was 1,000 agents working on it? They just won't think about that problem that way, and I think that's a real kind of, and that's taking advantage of the technology at its core as well. So I try to push people in that direction.
Yeah. Just out of curiosity, do you think there are any industries where startups still have the edge in AI? Because I guess maybe another way of framing that is like, what sectors have surprised you in the way they've adopted AI, and what sectors have been very resistant to like working with companies in the space or adopting or innovating?
I don't think there's anyone that's shied away from it now. I think everyone, and I think if you do the AI count thing, everyone has said it. Everyone wants to say it.
It's got to be off for this panel.
I mean, the one that was surprising to me was healthcare, but they're so into it. Like it's unbelievable in terms of like a tool that's being used as part of it. I think the differential is in whether someone is willing to go fully autonomous versus someone is willing to go in an augmented fashion. I think everyone's willing to do augmentation. It's wild in some of the use cases people come up with, even just like educational tutors, like the Khan Academy basically comes forward and teaches you how to be able to learn whatever subject you want. I think those are cool, but like more and more are just coming up everywhere. I don't know that there's a specific industry, what you guys have seen.
Yeah, I mean, one of the things that I think about a lot is most of technology for the last 40 years has been like taking paper processes and making them digital and making them somewhat faster. And I think enterprises are still stuck in that, and even leveraging AI to just make those processes even faster. I think now the advantage a startup has, it doesn't have to look backwards at how anything was done before. And so kind of reimagining the problem from scratch, that's where I see some of the most interesting things.
Absolutely. Yeah. Like, we talked a little bit earlier today, I guess, about being able to dynamically create UIs on the fly. So being able to tailor experiences for users based on, perhaps what you know about their interests, what their current focus is in terms of attempting to accomplish a task. And this is a complete reimagination of how the web is going to work.
Yeah, because before we took a form and we just made it digital and everyone got the same form.
And it was point and click, and now so many people are using mobile devices. The point and click kind of tapping on a phone isn't nearly as powerful as being able to use things like voice or video, being able to track things with cameras.
You can get like full personalization now, right? Like that dream of like dynamic content is actually possible.
Absolutely, and the models are getting smaller and smaller, which means that you could even have models put on mobile devices. We're experimenting with this with Gemini Nano, being able to do hyper-personalized experiences for folks that stay local to the device, don't have to make any calls to REST API surfaces. But when you start thinking about all this potential, this field is wide open. And y'all are the experts in how to make the web useful to humans. So useful to humans, useful to agents. So I think if anybody's going to be able to lead the charge in that, it would be the folks in this room.
And then just as we're speaking about the web, 5 years from now, what do you think the AI native web looks like? From two angles, like what is the user experience of the web and the internet? And then how do you think that changes the relationship between like people publishing on the internet and these search engines as they really just become answer engines? Does that like de-incentivize publishers? curious to get if you guys have any takes on that, but no worries. We have only a few minutes and many questions.
You want to go?
You're the product guy.
Cool. 5 years is a very long time in AI terms. If we look, and there's only so much I can say, but if we think about like how AI has started to improve, I think the number one thing that has improved with each iteration or each new model is the reasoning capability. So I think you look at like a GPT-3 that was like able to do a lot of things that you would probably call like equivalent to like an elementary school student. It's like it does some stuff, makes some mistakes, but it's kind of good. And then like GPT-4 comes out and it's like 100 times improvement on what 3 was, and the reasoning capability improved, but it's still kind of like a kid. Like it doesn't really do a great job. There's still a lot of mistakes. Multimodal comes around and like everything can happen. I think if you draw the future of the web, it's like, choose your own adventure. I think it'll become something that is, I still strongly believe visual is the way to go. I think that most people learn from like a visual kinesthetic perspective, and like while there is like an auditory element to it, it's kind of an intermediary stage. Like I don't need an audiobook all the time. Sometimes I just want to like scan through a page as fast as possible. But what if it's my page? And like what if it's the way I want it to be? And what if it's curated specifically for me and the content that I want with the layout that I like, with the specifics that I want, and like it's my web. And I think that like AI lets you realize that dream dynamically.
I 100% agree. And in addition to all of these great capabilities being brought in through multimodality in models, I'm also really passionate about longer context workflows. So being able to feed the model much more information and have it be able to analyze it very quickly, react to it at very, very, very low latencies. So as you were describing, being able to walk around kind of if I'm curious about the physics of, just things that exist in the room, an apple that I drop on the floor, being able to automatically have that overlain explained to me in a way that I understand, or in a way that would resonate most with me. I think there's so much potential here, and it's not just for kind of having the web just being confined to this two-dimensional screen that we carry around with us. But actually being able to have it persist in the world in three-dimensional space, and being able to be kind of ambient with us as we experience our days.
Yeah, I was going to go with something very similar. Like if you watch movies, sometimes kind of predict our future, or at least guide us in that direction. Like Minority Report and things like that. People don't really have phones, right? And so, I think we're getting closer and closer to a world where you don't need to really stare at a screen and search for stuff on your phone. So I think wearables and things like that will be pretty exciting.
I think playing on the 3D thing for just a 10-second thing, I kind of see that holodeck from Star Trek.
Yeah.
I'd love to use it if any of you are going to build that, just by the way.
Get us access to Sora.
Last question, and maybe if everyone could answer in less than a minute, because we have to go, but I'm interested in understanding, like, AI players are all kind of entering the field at a different level of the stack. Grok has an AI processing chip. Google has TPUs. I'm curious, how do you think the compute environment in like 10 years is going to shape up? Are a lot of the large model companies also going to try to deploy some type of hardware, and what are the benefits of having that? There's some rumblings about OpenAI, but he cannot comment.
We can just look at NVIDIA's earnings yesterday and see like the amount, exactly. Hopefully people have been buying that stock for a while. No, I think you can see that the amount of demand is just not slowing down. And, I think there's a strong perception, and, the folks in this room are going to make that a reality, that the majority of compute going forward is AI compute. So that requires just a total reimagining of data centers and, even your laptops, right? All that, get phones. So I think the opportunity for there to be a lot more AI compute is obvious. I think it's very rare that like one company wins it all, right? This, especially, kind of in America where we want multiple players to be involved in something. So I kind of think it's really exciting to be, to be in the ecosystem.
Strong agree. I think one thing that we can all agree on is that there's not nearly enough compute right now to do all of the things that we truly want to do. And that comes from a training perspective, but even more importantly from this really efficient inference perspective. So being able to run a large variety of models, all specialized for different tasks or general purpose, really, really quickly, either on mobile devices or in data centers or just kind of around rooms is really, really important. And I don't see that slowing down anytime soon. Google is certainly investing both in hardware for our mobile devices, pixels, things like Android phones, and then also certainly TPUs for both training and inference.
Yeah, I think it's compute is limited. Everyone needs to scale. Everyone needs to worry about like regional differences too. If you're in the EU, like making sure that you have sufficient there. So there's two ways to do it, like build more, which everyone's trying to do, or make them more efficient, which is what many people are trying to push, right? So like the latest GPT-4 model comes out with like 10 million TPM, so you can scale accordingly by like more efficiency in the models. But the risk is obviously like how much intelligence do you need for your use case and how far do you want to push that?
Okay, well, I think that is it for this panel. Thank you guys so much for speaking and being here.
Thank you. This was fun.
Thank you.